Hello grade 12s, today we're going to be looking at some revision questions on maps. So let's start off by looking at what we need to know as far as maps are concerned. This is the checklist of things that you need to do and you need to be able to do before your exams start. So first of all, I would suggest that you know how to use scales. Scales are those things that look like 1:something on the side of the maps, or sometimes they give you a line with measurements on it and then you need to measure it and then make up your own version of this. So you need to be able to do that. You need to also, if you are given measurements of parts of a map, you need to be able to determine what the scale is. You need to use a given scale in conjunction with other content or skills to complete a project. For example, given scale to determine the dimensions in which to draw a two-dimensional plan of an object and then draw the plan. So that is, they would be giving you a scale and you will be told to draw an item to scale. Another very important skill is to be able to read maps. On maps, you need to be able to identify key parts, for example, identifying the names and labels of national roads, for example, the N3, that must be travelled on between two locations. You also need to be able to identify the names of towns on which route, on the route between two locations. You need to also be able to look at the scale of that map and also then decide how far things are between two places. So that is included in identifying the position of two locations on a map and use the given distance values on the map to determine the travelling distance between two locations. We're going to be looking at this in a bit of detail. This is usually one of those line maps where they've got two places and then they've got numbers in between that indicates the distances between them. So you would have to then be able to determine the distances between two set places. You also need to be able to interpret the given set of directions and describe what location the directions lead to. So they could be giving you a list of instructions and you then need to tell them where you've ended up from one location to the next. I know this sounds pretty easy, but this is the skills that you would need to be able to do. You also would need to provide a set of directions to travel between two locations in a town using street names. So this would be when they give you a basic town plan, and then they might ask you to give the instructions to get from one place to the next. This is where it's very important to be able to use your compass coordinates, remembering north, south, east and west as the main ones, with the ones in between with the northeast, southeast, northwest and southwest as key coordinates to use in those types of descriptions. You also need to be able to use a map in conjunction with a distance chart. Distance charts are generally ones where you have to read off two different locations and find a coordinate where it shows how far two places are from each other and then determine the shortest route from one place to the next. So there might be one or two different ways of getting somewhere, but in order to get from one place to the next as the closest or the shortest distance, you would need to be able to determine that from those distance charts. Some of this sounds a bit like gobbledygook, but I'm sure once you look at some of the examples, you'll realize that it's not such a bad topic after all. You also need to be able to estimate travelling times between two or more locations based on estimated travelling speed and also known or calculated distances. So if you've been given distances, speed or time, you should be able to find one of those three items, and we'll look at an example of that shortly. Plans is another one. You need to be able to read plans. This could be of a building of some sort, and you need to be able to identify how many windows it's got, how many doors, how many rooms, etc. on this plan. They generally will have a key, and you would need to use that key in order to work out what they actually are referring to. You need to be able to identify on the plan a particular structure that is shown. For example, the door is shown on the north elevation plan. So that is referring to when you actually have a plan that's drawn from a side view, top view, etc. You need to be able to identify which part of the plan they might be talking about. You need to also be able to measure dimensions on a map and use the given scale to determine the actual dimensions. It's no good being able to have a plan, and then when you want to build the structure, you actually have no idea how much it is in real life, or to just make up the values as you go along. We'll be looking at a nice example of this later. You also need to be able to explain a proposed travel route in relation to distance, estimated travelling times, etc., and suggest and justify possible alternate routes. This is a very important skill in everyday life, that you should be able to have more than one travelling route that you could use, and then justify why you might have chosen one or the other. It could be done relating to things like travelling times and traffic and all those types of things. You also need to be able to use maps in conjunctions with other travel resources, for example, exchange rates, distance charts, bus timetables, and all of those types of things. You're expected to be able to use all of these types of tables to actually have it all linked together in your actual planning of your trip. The financial information, for example, the fare tables, petrol prices, etc., also would help to work out the cost of a trip. And then going on to decisions made during a journey based on considerations of fatigue, petrol consumption, and travelling time. So this would be, they might be asking you to comment on where would you take your breaks, and those types of questions. Then you need to also be able to interpret plans to determine the dimensions of a room in order to make decisions. For example, how much carpet needs to be ordered to tile the floor or to cover the floor. And we'll also look at a nice example of this. This is also linked to your area and sometimes your surface area. Right, so let's go on and let's actually look at some actual examples of questions that you might see in exam time. Right, the first question is linked to a map, and you are asked questions according to this map. So let's read the scenario. In question 1, Joshua is preparing a road trip from Durban to Cape Town for his December holidays. To plan the route, he uses maps and distance guides. A map and 2 of the distance guides that he uses are given below. So you'll see in your worksheet that you have a map of South Africa. If you look at the key over here, you will see that there's the yellow parts are the road. So all of these yellow bits that are going all over are main roads. You will notice that there are the odd little town like De Aar that's in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't mean that there isn't any roads to that place. It just means that there is no national road to that place. And then the little white dots are your towns. And this symbol over here is the symbol telling you which roads you are using. So for example, if I was going from Johannesburg to Durban, I would drive along the N3. The next part is distance guides. So if I wanted to actually see how far it was from Durban to Pietermaritzburg, you could see that those would be the considerations I'd need to look at. And you can see that from 0 to 79 was from Durban to Pietermaritzburg, and therefore you could then say that from Durban to Pietermaritzburg is 79 kilometers. You would need to be able to understand that these aren't going from north to south, because if you look at your actual map, from Durban to Pietermaritzburg is actually going in a northwesterly direction. So these types of maps really relate to distances only. They're not looking at your actual directions. Right, so let's have a look at the actual questions. Right, it said, first of all, study the map and distance guides carefully and then answer the questions that follow. What is the compass direction from Durban to Pietermaritzburg? Now, when I'm talking about compass direction, remember we said that we wouldn't look at the distance maps. We would be looking at the original map. That is going to be the one that shows you from which direction to which direction. So if we were going from Durban to Pietermaritzburg, we would be going in this direction. You can look at the top here. It tells you that this is north. So if I was looking at where I would be going from Durban to Pietermaritzburg, it would be in a northwesterly direction. Right, the next question is, what is the distance? Remember, now we're talking about distance, so we need to look at our distance chart. From Durban to Pietermaritzburg. Okay, so let's go back to our distance chart. This is the one we talked about earlier. From Durban to Pietermaritzburg is that distance over there, which we will now see is going from 0 to 79, so therefore it is 79 kilometers. Right, question 1.3. Calculate the distance from Cape Town to Three Sisters. Now, if I look back at my map, I first of all look at this map and I can't see any information on here about distance, so I need to go back to my distance map, and I see that I want to work out from Cape Town to Three Sisters. Here's Cape Town and here's Three Sisters, and I'll notice that this is my 1,400 kilometers, so that's my end value. I've now got another value here of 467 kilometers. Now please note that this is the distance from Bloemfontein to Three Sisters. I don't need to count up this part of the journey. I only need to count up the part from here to there. So if I wanted to find out the distance between this point and this point, I need to subtract these two values because I want to find out how many kilometers are there between here and here. So in order to work that out, I would then have to do 1,004 kilometers, take away my 467 kilometers. Let's do the sum on the actual question. So we said Cape Town was 1,004 kilometers, should I say, from Bloemfontein, and Three Sisters was 467 kilometers from Bloemfontein. And if I subtract those two, I should get an answer of 537 kilometers as my total journey from one to the other. Right, the next one is question 1.4, and we need to calculate the distance from Senekal to Springfontein. I think we need to first of all identify where Senekal is and Springfontein because they're not well-known places. So let's go back to our distance map. Okay, I've found Springfontein is over here and Senekal is over there. Now the problem is that they are on two different distance maps. I now know that Senekal is just a little way away from Bloemfontein, and so is Springfontein a little way away from Bloemfontein. So therefore, in theory, I should be able to go via Bloemfontein from one to the other. So first of all, I need to figure out how far away is Senekal from Bloemfontein. I can't just say 450 kilometers because that's actually from Durban. And I can't use the 628 kilometers because that's actually how far it is from Durban to Bloemfontein. So I need to find out the difference between these two. So in order to do that, I would have to do 628, take away my 450. And that should give me 178 kilometers. So now I've worked out that from Senekal to Bloemfontein is 178 kilometers. And then if I look on the other side, from Bloemfontein to Springfontein, that's a lot easier because it's 143, because I know from Bloemfontein 0 and to Senekal it's 143. But that doesn't answer the question. We wanted to work out how far it was from Senekal to Springfontein. So I would then need to add those two values up. So let's go to the question and do that. So if I had to write this out, I would write it out in full. I would first of all say Senekal to Bloemfontein. And that is equal to 628 minus the 450, which gave me an answer of 178 kilometers. I then had to go from Bloemfontein to Springfontein. Which would be 143 kilometers. Therefore, total is equal to 178 plus 143 kilometers, giving me a grand total of 321 kilometers. Right, last but not least, let's go on to find out the total distance from Durban to Cape Town via Bloemfontein. So if we look back at our map, what they're basically asking us to do is to find out the distance from Cape Town all the way to Bloemfontein, and then Bloemfontein all the way to Durban. So we're going to have to add up those two distance maps that went from one to the other. So I know that Durban all the way to Bloemfontein is going from the top of this map all the way to the bottom of this map, which is a whole 628 kilometers. And then on the other side, from Bloemfontein all the way to Cape Town is going to be 1,004 kilometers. Now you might have noticed I was talking about going from Durban to Cape Town. Because it's obviously the same place, it doesn't really matter if I went the other direction. So if I went from Cape Town to Durban, it would obviously be the same distance. So I need to then just add those two numbers, which is why this is only a 1 mark question, whereas the other one was 3 marks. So Durban to Bloemfontein was 628 kilometers, and from Bloemfontein to Cape Town was 1,004 kilometers, and I would then get a total of 1,632 kilometers. Remember, it's always very important to show working, because you never know where you might get some working marks. Well, that was the end of question 1. Hopefully it wasn't too taxing, and we're going to take a break now. Okay, we're back again. So let's start off by looking at question 2, and this one's all about looking at plans. Hopefully this will help you plan what your house might look like one day, and it also looks at scale. So we need to also keep in mind that not always are things the size that they are on a map. So let's have a look at question 2. Your question 2 starts off with your school is building a new classroom. The description of this classroom is that it has a door and 2 windows on one wall, and the opposite wall has 3 windows. The measurements of the classroom are as follows. The wall is the width of 5 meters. Now that would obviously including your windows and your doors. And then the height of the walls is 2,2 meters. So that would be from the floor to the top of the building. Your door has a width of 810 millimeters and a height of 1,8 meters, and your windows are 1,000 millimeters in width and a height of 1 meter. Please note that they have given us different units of measurements, so we need to always remember that we need to convert to be similar units when we're actually working with these things. Okay, so let's have a look. A plan of the classroom using a scale of 1 to 50 is to be drawn. The plan has been drawn not to scale, using appropriate symbols. On the diagram, label how long in centimeters the walls, windows and door should be if there was a diagram drawn accurately using a 1 to 50 scale. So let's have a look at what does 1 to 50 scale mean. 1 to 50 means that for every 1 centimeter, meter or kilometer, there is 50 of the same units on the map. So if I had a look at, for example, my map, they've given us that the width of the walls is 5 meters. So we know that this distance in real life is 5 meters, but obviously my plan is not going to be able to draw that accurately if I don't know how far it is in centimeters to draw it so that everything is in relation to each other. So I always like to go 1 is to 50. I know that this is the real life, and this is my map. I know in real life it's 5 meters, and I want to get it on the map distance in centimeters. Now the big problem is that I need to have the same units. So therefore I want to say so many centimeters is related to so many meters. So I need to first of all change this to be centimeters. So I'm going to change that to be 500 because I know 1 meter is equal to 100 centimeters. And I know that for every 1 centimeter on the map, I've got 50 centimeters in real life. If I had to work out how much I'm going to have to times this by, I would have to times this by 10. So 50 times 10 would give me 500. And what I do to the one side, I would need to do to the other. So I'm going to times this side by 10. So 1 times 10 is 10 centimeters. So I now know that this wall in real life it's 5 meters, but on my map it's going to be 10 centimeters. This is a symbol for the door. You can see that this would be showing how it opens. I'm working out the width of the door. If I go back to my question, it tells me that the width of my door is 810 millimeters. So I know that this is 810 millimeters. And this is in real life. I'm now looking to see how much it would be on my map. So again, I would then draw my 1:50. This is my scale. And again, this is on my map. And this is reality. And I know that this is 810 millimeters. And I want something on this side that is related in centimeters. I would first of all change this then to be in centimeters. I know that 1 centimeter is equal to 10 millimeters. So therefore, if I divide this by 10, I will find out that I've got 81 centimeters in real life as my door. So this is actually 81 centimeters. I now need to find out, okay, how am I going to work out what my actual work of how much it is going to be on the scale of my map? Because I need to write this in centimeters. How I do that is I need to work out what did I times the 50 by to get 81. And the best idea is to get out my calculator and say 81 divided by 50. And I get an answer of 1,62. So I've times 50 by 1,62 to get 81 centimeters in real life. So I need to then say 1 times 1.62 on this side to find out how many centimeters I have on my map. So this would be 1,62. If I wanted to check, I could say 1,62 times 50, and I should get back to my 81. Not so bad, is it? Right, the last part is my windows. This is the symbol for windows, and if you look back in our instructions, they've said it's a width of 1,000 millimeters. So in real life, it is 1,000 millimeters. I'm again going to convert that to centimeters because I want an answer in centimeters, so it's easier to have them in the same units. So again, I'm going to divide by 10 because there's 1 centimeter has 10 millimeters. So I want to find out what 100 centimeters is represented on my 1:50 ratio. Remembering that 1 is to 50, so this is on my map to reality. And I've got 100, which is actually quite a nice easy number because 50 times 2 gives me 100. So therefore, if I times this by 2, I'll get 2 centimeters as my distance on my map. So therefore, my window equals 2 centimeters on my map. Right, question 2.1. If the school wants to make blinds out of the fabric for the classroom windows, and the blinds are the same size as the windows, so the same size as the windows, calculate the total amount of material in meters that is needed to be bought. The material is 1 meter wide. So if you can imagine, we've got our windows. We need to now go back quickly to look at our question to determine how many windows we had. If you look back, it says the windows were 1,000 millimeters wide and 1 meter high. And if we look at our diagram, we can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 windows. So we know that they're 1 meter high, 1,000 millimeters wide, and we know that there's 5 of them. If I'm talking about how much fabric, they tell us that the material is 1 meter wide. 1,000 millimeters is 1 meter wide, so all I need to worry about is the actual length of each of these drops. And they've given us that information, which is 1 meter. So all I need to say then is 1 meter times 5, which is equal to 5 meters altogether. If the material for the blinds costs 60 Rand per meter, calculate the total cost of fabric for the blinds. Okay, so in the previous question, I worked out that I had 5 meters of fabric that I needed. So I need 5 meters of fabric, and each of those meters costs 60 Rand. So I'm going to then times this by 60 Rand. And if I say 5 times 60, I will get 300 Rand. And that would be the total cost of the fabric for the blinds. Right, the next part on question 2.3, the school needs to tile the floor. Now, whenever I see something about tiling, I always automatically think of area, because this is obviously very important to know when you're tiling a floor. So it says calculate the total area that must be tiled. Now what I need to picture is my actual classroom. Obviously the doors and windows don't actually matter, so I just need to know what my floor area is. I know that this side of the wall is 5 meters and this side of the wall is 5 meters because this classroom is a square. And therefore, in order to find the area, it is a square, so I would say length times breadth, which is 5 times 5, which is 25 meters squared. Please remember that the units for area is a square unit, and therefore you need to make sure that you've labeled that correctly. Right, the next part, 2.4. If the tiles come in boxes that cover 4 meters squared, okay, so 4 meters squared, so every box of tiles, if I actually laid them out, it would then cover 4 meters squared. Okay, how many boxes must the school buy? And explain your answer. Okay, so the key question is how many boxes? Let's first of all work out how many tiles we need to work out. We know from the previous question that the area of the floor is 25 meters squared. So the total area is equal to 25 meters squared. The area covered by one box is equal to 4 meters squared. Therefore, to find the number of boxes, I'm going to have to take the total area and divide it by 4, which is the amount covered by one box. So 25 divided by 4, let's get out our calculator. 25 divided by 4 is equal to 6.25. Okay, and then it says we need to say how many boxes must they buy. Now, unfortunately, 6.25 is not a sensible answer. 6.25 doesn't have any full boxes. So I need to choose whether to buy 6 or 7 boxes. If I choose 6, I won't have enough because there's going to be a part of the room that won't have any flooring. So that's not a sensible answer, even though if I actually had to round that number in maths, it would round down. But in Maths Lit, we need to remember that we have to have a sensible answer. And if I wanted to tile the whole floor, I'm going to actually have to choose 7 as my answer. And that's where we need to explain. It says explain your answer. I need 7 boxes, otherwise we will be a few tiles short to cover this room. Hopefully that makes some sense to you. Right, and then the last part is that you need to explain and calculate the cost. If each box cost 150 Rand per box, calculate how much the tiles would cost. So if one box costs 150 Rand, I have now bought 7 boxes, which I now need to times by that 150 Rand. So 7 times 150 is 1,050. So that would be the cost of the tiles to tile that classroom. And that brings us to the end of question 2. So hopefully by the end of question 2, you're starting to notice that you're going to have to be able to interpret plans, and from that you need to be able to either draw the plans, or you need to be able to use that information to find out what it is in real life that you're dealing with. And this could relate to a lot of different topics like surface area, where you might have to be working out the cost of painting a room, or you might also be looking at the cost of tiling the floors, for example, like we've just done, and that would be working with areas. So remember that there's a lot of crossover with other parts of the syllabus, for example, space and shape. And let's now take another break. Welcome back, and the next question is relating to something a little bit different. Now, not always are we going to see maps or diagrams that we're familiar with, so sometimes we just have to use our skills and we have to then relate them to maps that we might never have seen before. So this is a question similar to that. It's related to the London Underground, which some of you might never have seen this map before. So you would then need to use your skills looking at keys, etc., to determine how to answer the questions. So let's look at it. So the question says, this is a map showing a section of the London Underground, which is a train system. Refer to this when answering the questions below. Okay, so you can see this is the map. What you might not understand is that these are all different stations along the map, and you can see where they might be going, and there's all sorts of other symbols that you might recognize, for example, disabled symbols and airport symbols and all sorts of other things like that. Right, so let's have a quick look at the first question. If you got onto the tube at Oxford Circus, where Route 1 and Route 6 cross, what direction would you travel to get to Notting Hill Gate? Okay, so the two places we're looking for on our map are Oxford Circus and Notting Hill Gate. And the key of this question is the direction. So let's have a look at our map. They've said that Oxford Circus is where Route 1, which is this dark line over here, and Route 6 cross, which is this one with a double line. So that will help us to see where it could be. And if you look very carefully, this is Oxford Circus. Now they want us to tell them the direction. And are we going from Oxford Circus? If you got onto the tube at Oxford Circus, what direction would you travel to get to Notting Hill Gate? So we're going from Oxford Circus to Notting Hill Gate. So I need to now look and see if I can find Notting Hill Gate. And we're at Oxford Circus, and here is Notting Hill Gate. So you can see that if I travelled from Oxford Circus to Notting Hill Gate, I would be going in a westerly direction. So therefore, my answer for this one would be west. Right, the next one is also going from Oxford Circus. I need to find out the direction I would be going if I went to Gloucester Road. Okay, so I'm back at Oxford Circus, and now I need to find where Gloucester Road is. Gloucester Road is this place over here. So if I went from Oxford Circus to Gloucester Road, I would be going in a southwesterly direction. If you're not sure, it's always a good idea to draw your compass directions on the side of your page, and then you can see very clearly that obviously that would be northwest. This would be southwest, which is the direction we've just gone now, and you can then work out very easily if you don't remember. Okay, the last one we need to find in what direction. It would be from Oxford Circus to Warren Street. So I need to find out where is Warren Street. If I look carefully, Warren Street is up at the top here. If I was going from Oxford Circus to Warren Street, it would be in a northeasterly direction. Hopefully those were nice, easy 1-mark questions that were a giveaway. Alright, then you get a little bit harder, and this is where we have to actually describe how to get from one place to the next. So if you currently are travelling if you're currently at South Kensington, so that's the station that you're at the moment, and you had to describe how to get to Bond Street. So if you can imagine, you were lost, you were given this map, and now you had to decide, how do I get from the one to the next, and I need to give the instructions. So it says, if you're currently at South Kensington, describe how you get to Bond Street with the fewest stops. So obviously there might be more than one way, but you need to go the one that's got the fewest stops. Use the name of the line, use the key to help you, to describe which one you would be riding on and the compass directions. So I think we first of all need to identify where South Kensington is and where Bond Street are on our map. I think I'm going to change colour so we can see we're not going to get confused with previous questions. So we're looking at South Kensington. South Kensington is this place over there. And I need to get to Bond Street, which is over here. I can see that if I went along this line, changed over here and went up there, is one possible route. I also could go all the way around this way. I could also go along here and up there. I could also go a very long way around and go all the way up, around and down. So that is why it's very important that we look and see what the question asks, and it said the fewest number of stops. So I would get on this line, I would go up there, and then I would change at the station and then go up to the following one. So I would go from South Kensington. I would be going in a what type of direction? I think that's a northeasterly direction. This is this line over here, this dotty line over here, which is Route 5. So let's write that part first. So from South Kensington, I would use Route 5 in a northeasterly direction. So from South Kensington. Take Route 5 in a northeasterly direction to Green Park. Okay, so that's the first part of my journey. I haven't got to where I want to go yet because I need to actually get to Bond Street up the top here. So I'm now going to change to this grey line, which is Route 8. So I'm going to change at Green Park, and then I will go in a northerly direction to Bond Street on Route 8. So I'm going to change to Route 8 and travel in a northerly direction to Bond Street. I think it's always very important to make sure that you have identified these places before you even start with this, and also read the instructions and make sure at the end of it that you actually are doing what they've asked you. So they've said, can you describe how to get from South Kensington to Bond Street with the fewest stops, and name the line that you would be using and referring to compass directions. So I've got my compass directions, I've got my routes or my lines that I'm using, the Route 5 and Route 8, and then I think that I've got all the bits answered in order to describe how to get from one to the next. Right, the next part, it says the open circles in the map indicates where you would change lines to get onto another line. So if I look back at my map, what it's saying is that if I was traveling along this line, for example, I could get off this train at this point and I could get onto this line, for example. So all these circles indicate where I could get from one different train to another. So let's have a look and see what they're asking us. The open circles on the map indicates where you can change lines to get onto a different line. If you travelled on the train from Marylebone to Charing Cross, how many times could you change lines, not including Marylebone station? So if I want to go from Marylebone to Charing Cross, let's have a look at our map. Here's Marylebone, and here is Charing Cross. So if I travelled along this line over here, and I didn't count Marylebone, how many ones of circles have I got? There's 1, 2, 3. So on this map, there's 3 different places that I could change trains. Right, let's go on to 3.4. In question 3.4, the scale of the map of London is 1:50,000. It is given that the distance between Holland Park and Tottenham Court Road is 53 millimeters, and this would obviously be on the map. Use the scale to calculate how far this is in real life. Give your answer in millimeters. Okay. So first of all, I always like to write my scale. 1:50,000. Remember that this is my map and this is reality. They've told us that on the map it's 53 millimeters. So if I've times this by 53, I would then need to times this by 53. So 50,000 times 53 50,000 times 53 is 2,650,000 millimeters. That is correct, as they have asked for this question to be answered in millimeters. So this would be my final answer, 2,650,000 millimeters. All right, so they've tested that we can actually convert it. Now we need to find this distance in kilometers, and this is where we need to use our conversion skills. So we need to remember that 1 kilometer is equal to 1,000 meters. 1 meter is equal to 1,000 millimeters. Therefore, 1 kilometer is 1,000 meters times 1,000 millimeters, which gives us 1,000,000 millimeters. So 1 kilometer is 1,000,000 millimeters. So therefore, if I've got 2,650,000 millimeters, I need to divide by my million to work out how many kilometers it is. And if I divide that, I should get 2,65 kilometers. And that is my final answer, because I need to give my answer in kilometers. Right, now often they will give us the opposite of that. So sometimes they will ask us to convert from centimeters on the map to real life, and other times they will give us distances in real life and expect us to be able to answer that in what it is on the map. So we've got an example of both of these, but generally in an exam you could get one or the other, so be prepared for both. Right, so question 3.5, if the distance from Green Park to Leicester Square is 3,12 kilometers in real life, and the distance on the map is 10,4 centimeters, what is the scale? So now they actually are giving us what is the scale, rather than actually saying, well, this is the scale and we need to convert it back. So what I always like to do is to write my map to reality. So I know that on my map it's 10,4 centimeters, and in reality it's 3,12 kilometers. Now again, it's always a good idea to make sure that you've got the same units. I would perhaps convert both of them to be centimeters or to meters. I think that I could convert this to meters because I know that there are 100 centimeters in a meter. So this would be 0,104 meters. And if I converted this to meters, I would have to times it by 1,000. So I would get 3120 meters. Now that I've got them in the same units, I can then deal with them. I've got 0,104 and I've got 3,120 meters. Because they're now the same units, I can almost get rid of those units. And I need to make sure that when I've got a scale, it always says 1 is to something. Now, in order to get this number back to 1, I need to divide it by itself. So I'm going to divide it by 0,104, and that will give me the 1. But what I want to do to the one side, I need to do to the other. So I'm going to have to divide this side by 0,104. And if I get out my calculator, I will get 3120 divided by 0.104. And I'll get an answer of 30,000. So therefore, my scale is 1:30,000. So as you can see, that's the end of question 3. And you'll notice that even though that question started off with something that was looking very unknown, it actually ended up as having quite a few bits that you should have recognized, like the conversions and the speed, etc. So don't be put off by something that might look a little bit different. Remember, you have got the skills, and if you remember your conversions and the basics, you'll be fine. So good luck with that.